Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews, and I'm here today to bring you the first of my two year-end lists for 2022, with this one being my least favorite albums of 2022. Not specifically worst, because that makes the list sound a little bit too objective. Of course, these are all just my opinion. You are more than welcome to leave any and all opinions you have on this list down in the comment section. And why don't you tell me your least favorite albums of 2022 also down in the comment section. I'm also not going to do any dishonorable mentions for this list. I don't want to highlight too much negativity in this video. Just want to get the 10 out and we'll be done. So let's get this list going. Kicking the list off at number 10, we have Gunna with DS Forever. To give Gunna the benefit of the doubt on this one, this is probably my favorite of the Gunna releases I've heard. And let me make clear, I've heard a decent chunk of his discography, certainly not as atrocious as that Wanna album from 2020, so there's at least some positive connection to this album. That being said, this is still Gunna being Gunna, and that equates to quite the boring album all around. Not to mention Bloated, which seems to be a prevalent habit for trap rappers nowadays to heavily inflate their track list with mediocre songs. In some cases, the bloating isn't too much of an issue, like I think A Boogie with the Hoodie has one of the better track records in that regard, but those are very few and far between, and Gunna's was certainly on the bad end. But man, I just have so little to say about this one. If you've heard any trap album in the past, 2 years, you probably already know how this sounds, but this one has Gunna's lazily delivered vocals across it, super skeletal beats that are pretty much copy and paste throughout the album. The features give dime a dozen performances, except for Drake, who works well with the beat given more so than really any other feature, and Chloe Bailey, who unsurprisingly gives an amazing vocal performance. But all in all, man, I'm just getting so tired of talking about trap albums. I feel like a broken record saying anything about them, because it's always the same old things over and over and over. At least this one was less on the outright bad side, but that's still not much better. Number 9, I am giving to B.O.B. with Better Than Drugs. Y'all remember when B.O.B. was actually interesting? He had a good share of pop hits, certainly not the most groundbreaking hitmaker of the early 2010s, but I still enjoyed his songs with Rivers Cuomo, Bruno Mars, Hayley Williams, all those iconic tracks that pretty much soundtracked many a road trip for me and my family. That artist is pretty much gone 12 years later, and all that remains is a withered, disheveled, and frankly checked out musician, as this latest album of his is just sleepy, generic, uninteresting combination of R&B and hip-hop. Sure, it's a very reasonable assumption to make that B.O.B. wouldn't be releasing good music this late into his career, but at this point, what purpose does he even serve anymore? It's been really unfortunate to see his career gradually deteriorate to where we are now, but at least there have been some interesting points in that journey. Here, the song Blue has a decent flow, Reminisce has a solid energy, and Baby Tate does a good job with what she's given. That's about all the highlights that I think are worth mentioning. This one's a very similar case with Gunna's in that it's boring to the point of being bad, it's not offensive, and it's not actively hurting me to listen to it, it's just so much nothing. And I think it's that sad realization and the disappointment of it all that really landed this album here. Number 8, we'll have to go to Ken Carson with X. I was not expecting this one to make the list, even after listening to it the first time. Sure, we've all seen Fantano's score of it floating around the internet that came the fuck out of nowhere, and I'll say right now, I do not agree with it. This album still has moments, most notably in the synth work, however, they are extremely sparse against the 20-song track list that makes up this lazy, uninspired album. To put it simply, this album is Playboi Carti if he had no idea how to have fun. The beats are generic, the energy is fairly tame, and man, Ken is probably one of the most annoying headlining MCs on a project this year. His flow is wonky and uncomfortable, the lyrics are asinine and repetitive, the flow and fluidity of the record drags for nearly 50 minutes. It's an immensely tedious listen, but I think the biggest sin this album commits is Ken just sounding lifeless across it. Like, if you're gonna mimic the upbeat, energetic style of Carti, or even Yeet, you gotta have the energy, and this doesn't have it. It's disappointing, it's tiresome, it is pretty bad. All I can say is I get why it's so negatively received. Number 7 goes to Van Morrison with What's It Gonna Take. Thankfully, this album was an improvement over Van's last album, Latest Record Project, which was an album that managed to top my worst albums list last year. That was a dreadful mess, and I'm happy to say he didn't take the gold medal of garbage 2 years running. But he is still here, as What's It Gonna Take is still not that good. There are some positives here, so let me start with those. The album sounds quite nice overall. The instrumentation is pretty fresh, it's quite polished, and Van himself sounds way more passionate than on Latest Record Project. That's about all I've got in that regard. Sure, while I did say the album sounds nice, the actual music is pretty boring. The bluesy folk rock on display starts to get tedious very quickly, as a lot of these tracks stretch into the lengthy 4.5 minutes and longer, and with this being 15 tracks and nearly 80 minutes, it is a slog to finish. Even with this being a gracious 50 minutes less than the predecessor. The lyrical content is probably going to be the biggest controversy of this record, continuing the conspiracy theories, anti-COVID, whatever of his last record, but not really as potent, and in that case this album doesn't really have much of an identity. The only track that really leaves any lasting impression is the song where Van unceremoniously mentions brainwashing and then proceeds to say blah 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 too many times. Van's just been in this pothole for the past couple of years, and given the new songs he's released plus the announcement of another album dropping in March, I don't think he wants to get out of it. Hope that record's better. Number 6 is going to Crypt and Joey Nato with The Sky Is Red. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and defend YouTube rapper Crypt briefly, because I actually had a decent bit of expectations going into this new album of his. Most notably because of his last album, Buried Alive, which I thought was quite good, great even, and I will probably be the only critic on this platform to voice that particular opinion. Easily the best full-length album he released, but man, this one may just be his worst. I really hoped he would continue on the more hard-hitting, menacing, and pleasantly introspective path paved on Buried Alive, but aside from the first 2, maybe 3 tracks, this album is a hulking nosedive. And I think the biggest issue for me is the production, which is extremely flat. The spineless trap beats on display throughout like 80 to 90% of the album just sound lazy and easily make up the worst parts of the album. Crypt himself is okay for the most part. He has his moments like the aforementioned opening tracks, and Call You Back, which has a decent flow but is then instantly negated by a shitty hook. And I think the song Stones is probably the closest the album gets to capturing that magic of Buried Alive, even if it's fairly shallow and can't hold a candle to a song like Bad Friend. There's very little else of note. A lot of the singing, especially on the hooks, feels more lifeless, like Snow or the melodic trap on Pouring Rain. Paramount and Chill has some of the worst lyrics on this record and sounds like a modern Eminem cut with all these gross similes. And Blackout just sounds so overblown and muddy, it's pretty obnoxious. Overall, I really hope this is a minor detour for Crypt. I know the man has talent and that he can put out great material. I hope that comes in the form of the next record and that we can all collectively forget about this one. Number 5 goes to Kid Rock with Bad Reputation. I don't feel like I need to talk about this one too much. This one should have been fairly expected. It's Kid Rock in 2022. The album was destined to be bad no matter how many times it was done over on the drawing board. I'm going to keep this one fairly brief because I don't want to give Kid Rock any more attention. The instrumentation is mostly heavier country rock themed. Not as rap tinged as I would have expected from Kid Rock, but I think that makes it stand out even less. Kid Rock vocally is fine, probably one of the better elements of the record, and these lyrics are just stupid. Again, expected of Kid Rock. Like, no one goes to a Kid Rock record expecting good lyrics. But they're always there, making everything worse. I'm done talking about this. Kid Rock, we all knew this. Get it out of here. Number 4 is going to Meghan Trainor with Taking It Back. I've never been the biggest fan of Meghan Trainor to begin with, even for being a mainstream pop listener like myself. I think I fell out with her around the rollout for her 3rd album, and just kind of felt whatever on that one in particular. So I originally went into this album expecting to feel the same, but holy shit, this is probably one of the most soulless pop albums I've heard this decade. Such a tedious record, and this is even her shortest album in length. It is bubblegum pop to the point of cavity-inducing, and my sweet tooth isn't even that strong to begin with. In fact, it basically sounds like Megan trying to duplicate that lightning in a bottle virality of All About That Bass, but for an entire album. And my god, these synthesized horns, doo-wop instrumentals, and the constant peppy, upbeat style of the album gets tiresome so quickly. She has managed to snag a little bit of that virality with her most popular hit in a while with Made You Look, which I would say is one of the least deserving tracks to become a hit off this album. It feels really lazy, as does this whole album. The vocals don't offer too much, the lyrics feature Megan's signature brand of cheesy optimism that doesn't click with me in particular, and despite it feeling happy, cheerful, and lively, usually what I like in my pop music, Megan is practically affixed to this one sound and refuses to switch, and it made this mind-numbingly boring. Huge skip on this one. Number 3 is going to Journey with Freedom. This is probably the biggest surprise on the list for me, as I was expecting to really enjoy this one. Journey is a band I have a sentimental nostalgia for, with my family really enjoying that glam AOR hard rock sound of the 80s, and with me enjoying quite a lot of what I have heard from the band outside of the hits, of course. And I was quite curious to hear where this band was at this point. It had been a whole 11 years since their last album, Eclipse, But man, I don't know where the band I loved went because this was bad. Let me start with the most disappointing element here being the mixing and production. The album was released by Frontiers Records, a label I hold in such high regard as being pioneers of this modern AOR and hard rock sound, and they often have immaculate and crisp production, even for new signees just releasing their debut album, and yet for a band like Journey that has such prestige and a legacy to them, this mixing sounds like garbage. Arnel Pineda might as well have sung these lines 10 to 20 feet away from the microphone. Speaking of Arnel, his vocals are awful, not just in the mixing like I described, but just in the energy and attitude of these songs. He sounds like he could not give a single fuck for these recordings. His energy is dull, uninspired, dollar store Steve Perry without any fun at all. The instrumentals are pretty much the only saving grace of the album, but even still they enter bleak and dull territory like the supposedly more funky All Day and All Night that's way more grey, or Holding On that just feels plastic with its synths. I was just miserable throughout this 75-minute listen, and it's arguably gotten worse for me somehow. Not worth your time. Lay it to rest like it deserves. Number 2 is going to Tom MacDonald and Adam Calhoun with The Brave. Much like the Kid Rock album, this one really should have been a given. I have a weird love-hate relationship with Tom MacDonald. I had my YouTube rap phase around early to mid-high school. Most of the artists I listened to back then I am not proud of, and I'd sort of lump Tom MacDonald into that same scene. But I think what is the most frustrating thing about following Tom's career is that the man has potential. Even if I don't enjoy his discography, I think the guy has charisma, he has a good flow, and honestly decent production. So it always hurts me when he just proceeds to shoot himself in the foot and go for lyrics and themes so obviously catered towards clickbait and appealing his edgelord fanbase. Let's talk about the music of the album. It's pretty bad. Pretty much every instrumental follows a country rap hybrid sound fitting for Adam Calhoun. Extremely simple rhythm and melodies while also trying to hold on to an overblown sing-songy chorus that has never been either artist's strong suit, and surprise surprise, there's not really a good hook on this entire album. For a record so firmly locked in a scene that is quite fiery, temperamental, and expressive, you'd think the overall music would be more exciting. That being said, if I had to throw a positive at this album, it'd be reiterating for the millionth time that both of these rappers do have genuine talent. I think the flows and deliveries are easily the best part of the album. It's just a shame that both seem to misuse it every single time without fail. I am still hoping that we can eventually see greatness from both of these artists, and I've been keeping my fingers crossed for years now. And at this point, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep it up. And finally, we are here at the top of the list. Number 1, this might come as a surprise to some of you. It is The Game with Drillmatic, Heart vs. Mind. I cannot explain to you how unbelievably angry this album made me for the first listen. I'm not the biggest Game fan out there. Of course, I've listened to the documentary, which I enjoy a good bit, but I haven't really cared to check out his recent material, especially his last and also too long album in 2019, Born to Rap. But hearing the news that this album has a near 10.5-minute diss towards Eminem piqued my morbid curiosity to not only check out that song, but also to check out the whole album, which for the record is a mind-numbing 31 tracks and a minute shy of 2 hours. I typically prefer my music and albums on the shorter end, and if they're not, they gotta be concise. All killer, no filler, and this pretty much has zero killer. Let's start with the man himself, and more specifically these lyrics. Pretty much every song has several references to another artist, album, celebrity, what have you, and it just gets more and more irritating hearing him say the same nothing but referencing someone different, really trying to cling on to any semblance of a trend or attention or some kind of quotable, but he doesn't do anything with them. It's not clever, it's just shouting out other artists making better music. Speaking of other artists, the sweltering amount of features on here. To give them credit, they are some of the best elements of the record, as some, not all, but some do bring their respective tracks out of the mediocre grave already dug. And I'd say the best examples are Pusha T and 2 Chainz on No Man Falls, Rick Ross on Save the Best for Last, and 5 Foreign on Burning Checks. Now normally this would be the part here where I'd give a little bit of praise to the instrumentals maybe, but not really, no. Given the lengthy track list, even the instrumentals that I thought were just okay are lost in the sea of generic R&B tinged or dedicated trap beats that don't really help in any shape or form. It has pretty much nothing to deliver, it feels lazy, it's certainly a mess, and it is my least favorite album of 2022. Alrighty guys, and that is going to do it. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. If you have your own opinions, please leave them in the comment section. I would love to hear your thoughts. And make sure you follow my social medias and join the Discord server. The links will all be in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.